Advisory Commission to order. I don't believe we need a roll call. Evangelina, you got everybody here? All right, so at this point, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda. I have a motion by Commissioner Burris to approve the agenda and a second by Councilor Kunkel. Any discussion or debate on the agenda? Hearing none, seeing none, I'll ask for a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, passes unanimously. Next up is the minutes from Thursday, March 19th. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Anybody? I have a motion by Commissioner Call to approve the minutes for the Thursday, March 19th, 2020 meeting, and a second by Commissioner Armstrong. Any discussion or debate on the minutes? Hearing none, seeing none, I'll ask for a voice vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes as presented signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say nay. Hearing none, approved unanimously. Item number 5, Air Center Director Status Report Update. Mr. Stark.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. We'll start with probably the most obvious thing that's going on out at the airport. We are getting lots of airplanes. We are up 270 airliners since we began this COVID pandemic. There's still enough demand to fill up any space that we have left. We're getting a little crowded, and Randy and Jordan and I were just talking about that before the meeting. We need to be able to move some airplanes around to be able to get some of the other ones in, to be able to stage and to button them up and to move them into their permanent parking places.
How many total are there, Scott?
Total, we're running about 420, 430. So we started somewhere in the neighborhood of 150. We've got 270 in, so the numbers are a little bit fluid, but in that neighborhood. And it's hard still to gauge the capacity. I think with what we have left out there, the type of airplanes that we have coming in, if we get a lot of the smaller ones, that number obviously is going to be higher, and probably between 600 and 700. If we get a lot of the bigger ones, we're close to out of space for the bigger ones already. We can't take that many more big ones until we can move some things around and maybe make some space. So the arrival rate has slowed because of the lack of space and the lack of ability to move things. Right now, we didn't get any yesterday, and it has slowed to just a couple a day. From American in general, we're not getting anything from United. They pretty much have stopped it. We'd like to be able to get back to moving airplanes again. Having a little bit of a discussion with the FAA on closing runway 17, and I do not have a concurrence from them yet on our plan to do so. We obviously have issues, you know, air sale with the airplanes coming in, the airlines with the airplanes coming in at a quicker rate. That makes the demand for space to be able to shuffle the cards, basically. But we also want to protect our runway. We don't want the airplanes sitting out there on the runway and making divots in it because they're sitting rather than rolling, because the runway is asphalt and not made for dead loads for long periods of time. So that's a concern that we have. And I think we've worked through a lot of those type of issues. So now we're really down to with the FAA, the length of closure of what we would do for that runway to use it for staging. And so that's where we still have some things we want to work out. And, you know, and I'll say my standpoint really are two things. I don't want to damage my runway. I don't want to damage any airplanes. If we close one runway and we are down to one runway, that we can function as long as everything functions properly at the airport. But if we have an accident on that runway, now we have no runways. So that's a concern as well. So those things I think still need to be addressed a little bit. it's getting tougher to get to something agreeable at this point, I think. So with that said, we do still have room, but we do need to be able to use the room we have probably a little more efficiently. Mr. Burris?
Couple of questions. These airplanes coming in, did it increase employment in the years?
Increase, I'm sorry.
Employment, more
Employment.
jobs.
I would say the short answer to that is yes. I would let Air Sales speak to that directly.
Bill have hired about 130 additional.
Cool.
Sorry, it's the mask. It sounds muffled to me.
130 new people plus overtime, correct?
It is. It's not going to be a sustained over.
Right.
We'll drop back on that once all the aircraft go to the storage program, but we still have a pretty good staff out there.
Fantastic. I'm glad they're there. Second question is, if you close the runway and you're parking airplanes on it, are we expecting any damage? Temperature goes up?
Well, and that's what we're looking at. So as we go through this, I would be restricting the weight of the aircraft on that runway to the weight that it's rated for. So, we're using the engineering to do that. And then the other piece is, Randy and I have talked a lot, and they really don't want to park airplanes on it. They want to use it to move airplanes and use the concrete that's near the runway that we can't use right now because the runway's open. So they're not going to park airplanes on it. They'll use it to tow and taxi, and then use the concrete nearby to actually park them until they get things moved where they need to be. And then we would move those airplanes out and reopen the runway.
One last question. When these airplanes are coming in, are they defueled? Are they coming in light? They're being defueled, and is that impacting anything there with your movement of the jet fuel in or out?
So I believe AirSail has contracted with somebody to take care of offloading. Is that correct?
So the aircraft come in with limited fuel on them, just enough to get them in. Once they're on the ground, there still has some fuel in them, and they bio-board. They're treated so they don't fungal growth inside the tanks. So there is fuel still in them. It's a minimal amount. Depending on what the aircraft is, what the manufacturer of the aircraft is giving.
Randy, I hate to say this, but we need to get you to come up to a microphone so that we can get a recording of this. Sorry. Ms. Call, the city clerk, or as she's also known, Her Highness, has just texted me and informed me that this is not coming through without good recording. So just briefly recap that if you don't mind. You got the button. Push the
You
button
got to push the button.
where it's
You got-
green light.
You got a green light, you're good.
Okay.
We're on, okay. So the aircraft come in with minimal fuel loads on them. We asked that prior to the aircraft even arriving, just to make sure that we don't have a lot of fuel to deal with when the aircraft get here. Once they're on the ground, we will defuel them to a point where the manufacturer's specifications are. Airbus different than Boeing, Embraer different than all the rest, but there is fuel left on the airplane, and then we treat that fuel to make sure we don't have microbial growth inside the engines, or inside the tanks, which would affect the engines. So the answer is yes, there is fuel still on the airplanes. It's minimal load. We have no plan of parking any airplanes on that runway. I would have to use it to tow aircraft across it to the runway over where we're using near the blimp hangar, where that concrete is. That's what I need. I just need a place to spread the aircraft out right now to reshuffle them and restack them, because we were receiving 10 to 20 airplanes a day, and all we were doing was just kind of stuff them in a place that they could go. Okay?
And then the job, if you want to repeat the part about the employees?
Yeah, just say that real
Sure.
quick.
So we started out with 70 mechanics. We'll be ramped up to around 200 mechanics here by next Friday is our target. Most of those are contractors coming in from out of state. I won't, in the end, keep 200 here, but for the next 2 months or so, we'll probably still have the 200. We'll scale back because once the aircraft are inducted into a storage program, then the requirements on the airplane are a lot less maintenance. I'll go ahead and tell you that some of these aircraft are going to require extended maintenance at some point. So that's our strategic plan in the long run, is to court some of these customers where they're going to have airplanes here, and before they go back in service, there's going to be heavy maintenance have to be done on the airplanes.
Okay.
Get some C-checks would be nice.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Bud?
Scott, it doesn't sound like, with what Randy's saying, that there's a need or a desire to put aircraft on asphalt, which is different from what you just said.
So.
I misunderstood you.
There's a couple of things that have to happen. So when the aircraft come in, they have to induct them. So they have to do that in a clean environment. So that's what Randy's talking about. I'll put them on the concrete, get them inducted, get them basically buttoned up, closed up. And then some of them are going to go, the heavier ones have to go on the concrete. They're not going to fit, they're not going to be held up by that old asphalt. And we can't leave them on the new asphalt because we damage it. So they have to wind up on concrete. The 737s, the 319s, 321s, the RJs, those are more apt to work on the asphalt. And so that's kind of what we're talking about. And correct me, Randy, if I'm thinking different at all.
That's true.
But that's what we're talking about, is when they come in 10, 20 at a time, I mean, on a day, it doesn't take long before they add up, and they take up a lot of space. And our concrete is limited. We're much less limited on our old asphalt. And what we put out on the old asphalt so far is doing fairly well. We do have some issues, but we knew we would. So over east of the tower, there are probably, about 30 over there now? Does that sound about right? And that seems to be working fairly well on that asphalt. We haven't filled up west of the tower. There still needs to be some shuffling there. We have a lot of room southeast of runway 21 where we've cleared that. We've moved a lot of the older aircraft over there, and AirSail's still got a lot of Americans aircraft over along the old runway that we'll do some shuffling with, because we believe that old runway will hold the heavier aircraft. So some 767s will go over there, some MD-80s will get moved around, and I guarantee you we'll find some surprises. We just know we will. And it won't work as perfectly as we think it will. Randy and Jordan and I were talking about a little bit about how when you turn aircraft, it's causing more damage to that old asphalt than what we anticipated. But those are the things we learn as we go.
All right, just so you know, this call is on me. Everybody has to speak into a microphone, please. Otherwise, I am in trouble. And Commissioner Kunkel was smiling at that thought. So she is watching us. That's why my phone's exploding. But you still have the floor, Commissioner.
So if we have to use asphalt at some point during the process and/or storage, the asphalt is the old stuff that you scraped off the dirt off of? Is that what that is?
That's correct.
Okay. So that hadn't been used in forever, so do we really need to care about whether or not that gets torn up a little bit?
No, we're not.
Okay, all right.
No, the issue there is the airplanes, not the asphalt.
Okay.
And we're discussing metal plates and that type of thing in those places where we might need a little more support. So we're getting creative. We haven't gotten to the point where we need to do any of those kind of things yet, but those are kind of the back pocket stuff at this point.
On that, if I can interrupt for a minute, I don't know if you guys have already been doing this, but I'm going to ask to make sure that all, people, track all these costs dealing with the clearing of the debris and, the dirt, and anything to do with enhancing the parking ability, especially any work that was done by either streets or parks and recreation to help on that. If that's, because where I'm going with this is, I don't know emphatically, but I believe we may have an opportunity to recoup those direct costs as part of the COVID-19.
Okay.
So that, I know that, there's different parts of the city staff that are tracking this, and so, and I think legitimately, we would never have done any of this if it wasn't for COVID. So we do that. You guys at AirSail, I don't know if your corporate folks are looking at the additional things you guys are doing, but you may or may not be able to get some additional compensation too.
They are.
Okay.
They are.
Because that's the one thing we're very concerned about.
I did have a conversation with Karen Sanders about that very subject.
Good.
And she does not believe it'll be covered.
Well, things are changing though.
Right.
But let's keep it tracked anyway, and then we can always, hey, we can always ask, and they can always say no.
Right.
All right. Commissioners, I apologize for this. We're speaking into the microphones. Okay, keep going.
Okay. Then the other burning question, I think, on everybody's mind is how our air service is doing. It's not, is the short answer. But we're no different than anybody else in the United States. Our load factors are running around 5% or maybe a little less. We have, right now, our normal schedule. If you look at the schedule, if you go and I did it this morning just as an experiment. If you go and you try to book a flight and you say, I just want to go from Roswell anytime during the day, all of our flights show up, except Phoenix. Phoenix has been canceled since April 7th. All the Dallas flights show up. However, you might not get your 10:30 Dallas flight because you may be the only one who booked a ticket on it, and they may cancel it. That's what's going on right now. So, again, I don't know what triggers them to cancel a flight. I mean, certainly it's about money and about how many tickets are sold. But what we're basically getting consistently every day right now is one in, one out. And that is what's on the schedule starting May 7th. We'll have the one Dallas flight that will leave in the morning around 8:30, and then return about 7:30. And so for the foreseeable future, that's what we've got. What I hear talking to our consultants is that other places got a lot worse. They don't have service, other places that are our size. So we're lucky to have it, and that isn't very comforting, but nevertheless, lucky and grateful because we're really putting about maybe 5 people. I've seen one person get on several planes. But the other side of that is, as Randy knows, those American pilots got to get back to work somehow. So they're going to probably continue to run at least some of those flights so that they can pick their crews up and take them back to work. I think that's pretty much it on that.
You wanna talk about the tanker controversy we had and how we are not having it? It's all been resolved, right?
Yes, it's all been resolved. So starting yesterday, actually day before yesterday, a fire started down in Texas, and I want to thank AirSail for moving as quickly as you guys did to get airplanes out of the way, because we didn't have much notice. We got middle of the day before yesterday that, hey, we got to move the planes, and they want to bring the DC-10 in here. And they wanted to bring in an MD-80 at first, but it broke down in Midland, so that didn't show up. But the DC-10 did come in yesterday, and it's here now. They're running slurry bomb runs out of our airport right now down to the Big Bend area to put out a big fire down there. So the fire season has started. BLM's up and running. They're running that DC-10 and then a British Aerospace 146. So both of those are running out here. Yeah, it used to be the Bach 146 for us old guys, but they changed the name. Same airplane though, so a little 4-engine commuter. So they're doing that. And then that seems to be working pretty well. I think they're making 4 or 5 turns a day on that DC-10. We're beginning the process now, also time of year, which is normal, of trying to get our design stuff out to bid for our projects for this year, which I'll remind you guys is the supplemental project that we got the $1.2 million supplemental on, which is Taxiway Alpha and Juliet rebuild. We're delayed a little bit on that because of negotiations with FAA on the design, but that should still go to bid and then actually go to construction sometime this summer, late summer, early fall. We're close on our design on our parking lot, which was our $2 million MAP grant bid. And so we're close on that. Not sure when that'll go to bid, but I'm still looking at probably the same time frame, late summer, early fall for construction on that. Questions?
Commissioners, anything?
And with that, I'll throw the ball to Mr. Bleth, and let him talk about leases and introduce our next one.
Okay.
Good morning.
You want to move up there, Mark? That might work better.
Good morning, everyone. So I have on the phone, Larry, are you on the phone?
Yes.
Okay, let me introduce Larry Erickson. He's a VP at Aragon. Aragon's a customer out at the Air Center that's in a leasehold with us. It's good until 2028, and he's going to go through a presentation. We've been working with them probably for at least the last 6 months on land acquisition. So the land they're currently sitting on, acquiring that land, and doing some improvements on that land. So Larry's going to walk through the presentation that you see in front of you. You should all have hard copies of it. And this afternoon we'll be presenting this at legal as well. So we'd like your input on the deal. We believe it's a fair deal for all parties involved, for the community, for the Air Center, as well as for Aragon. So with that, Larry, do you want to go ahead and kick that off?
Sure, and thanks again for having us, and congratulations on all the added revenue for airplane storage out there at the airport. That's promising. Yeah, if you want to jump to slide 2, Mark, and a little introduction on who Ergon is. Ergon is a privately family-owned company based out of Jackson, Mississippi. The next bullet point there goes through some of our core businesses that Ergon is in. I won't go through each one of those. We can all read through that. But next bullet point down is Ergon Asphalt and Emulsions, which is one of the larger Ergon divisions, Ergon companies. And we currently have about 60 locations, asphalt terminals throughout the United States and Mexico, and we are in the process of onboarding a recent acquisition of 6 more locations up in the what we call the Intermountain Northwest region of Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, and eastern Washington and Oregon's. If you want to go to the next slide, Mark, that's kind of an overview map of all of our U.S. and Mexico locations, and this is just for our Ergon Asphalt and Emulsions group. Many of our Ergon companies have worldwide locations as well, but we're just focusing on this area of the country right now. It's all color-coded, so you can kind of see what our 4 big companies are underneath the Ergon Asphalt and Emulsions umbrella. Craftco is one of our big divisions. I think many of you probably know them. They're the crack seal guys, the crack fill guys. They're a manufacturer of all those products and equipment. All the black squiggly lines you see going down the road, and the state of New Mexico is a big user of those products, and I believe the city of Roswell themselves uses some of their products as well. Going to the next slide. And this is where we get into talking about our Roswell operation. We originally purchased this emulsion terminal from Western Emulsions back in 2016. And what we do here is we produce road emulsions that are used for pavement preservation, surface treatments on roads, and again, the city of Roswell uses our product as well. The emulsions are primarily used in chip seals, slurry seals, microsurfacing, fog seals, and then tack coat for new paving when they're paving new asphalt roads. The current lease we have with the city is through 2028, and currently we have 7 employees there at the Roswell plant right now. Going to the next slide. The deal structure that's been proposed is that Ergon will pay appraised value for this land of about 13.5 acres for $340,000, and that's a cash benefit to the city of about $225,000 over what the lease of the term would be. And we are looking for a 30-day diligence period to obtain title insurance and commitment. The city will continue to maintain the rail line that serves the property. Ergon will participate in maintenance costs of that rail line in the future, up to $20,000 a year. And then if there are any other users of that rail line that may use that line in the future, they'll participate in these maintenance costs as well. And the city is planning to reserve an easement for that location and the maintenance and operation of that main rail line that comes through the property. Next slide is what we've worked out with the city for some improvements around that area on Railroad Avenue. For us to really to operate and function properly, we need to have free access across Railroad Avenue, which is the road directly north of our plant, to move rail cars across that. The rail cars are stored on the north side of the road, but obviously we need to get them across that road, to offload them and get them onto the terminal site. So the city has worked with us this past year in closing that road down temporarily, but what we're proposing to do is do a construction project there where we're just going to demo some of that Railroad Avenue and along Well Street there, just so we don't have any concerns of people trying to sneak through there or drive through there when we're moving rail cars across there. Ergon has our own tug that can move rail cars, so we don't have to wait for the BNSF to come and switch us all the time. So that's what makes this so much more effective and efficient for us, is to have that free access coming across that road. And of course, if it was a live road, our risk management and legal people would have a heart attack for us trying to go across that road if there was public access to it. So that's all worked out well, and again, we thank and appreciate the city for working with us over this past year. Once we get approval and the land sale goes through and our board has approved this whole deal, we will start construction on all of this road. In the next map, or the next slide kind of shows us a little bit of detail, in more detail, what we plan to do there. But we should be able to get the construction project done within a month time frame, pretty easily, start to finish. The contractor's telling us 3 weeks, but we'll plan on a month to get that done, start to finish. The next map, the aerial view, shows you what that work plan consists of, wherever the road is X'd out, that is where we would be demolishing the road and taking the road out. There's a solid line there that goes from Earl Cummings up to Railroad Avenue, where we would construct a new road so that the shredding company would still have access, egress and ingress on Earl Cummings Loop there. And then there would be a farther west on Railroad, where it crosses the actual railroad tracks. On Wells Road, there would be a barricade, a permanent barricade put in there so traffic cannot come from the west and access over the rail tracks there. I don't know if you can see on the picture or not, but there's some dotted line there north of Railroad. And that's basically the spur. That's to indicate somewhat where the rail cars are parked. There's a spur there that BNSF parks our cars on for us, and then we can move them across Wells Road there, or Railroad Avenue on our own, move them onto our property. As you can see, there's some cars already there on our property in this picture. You can see how they line up and how we need to get those into our heating spurs to get them offloaded. Next slide, the value proposition is that we would like to, Ergon wants to construct some additional assets on our property that would help support the emulsion terminal, and actually create an opportunity for us to grow our business. And that's, we would like to put a large storage tank in there and you can see the circle on the property approximately where that storage tank would go in. That's about a $2 million investment for Ergon, and with this bigger tank would enable us to grow our business. We should be able to increase our staffing as well. In addition to that, as kind of a goodwill proposal, Ergon is proposing to put in a landscaping barrier on the north and the west side of the property that we're proposing to buy, which would consist of about 125 to 150 cedar trees that would be fully irrigated, and it would be done by a professional contractor, landscape contractor from the Roswell area. And as well, the road project that we're planning to do and improvements there, that's going to also be most likely constructed by a local Roswell contractor as well. So, moving to the next slide, it's just questions. Hopefully, Drew Brooks, our business development manager, was intending to give this presentation, but he's tied up on another call. So I did it, and so if there's any questions, I'll do the best I can to answer them. But.
Any questions, commissioners, on this one? Commissioner Kunkel.
I'm sorry, your name's Larry?
Yes.
Larry Erickson, yes, correct.
Okay.
Make sure your button's pushed.
Larry,
Is the green light on?
yes.
Okay.
All right, so I can go ahead? All right. On the aerial photo of the project, I can't tell for sure how large the 13.39 acres is. If I go to the value proposition aerial, it looks like where the current facility is located, and that's on the east side, but you say you're going to put trees in along the north side and the west side. So does the entire property, the 13.39 acres, does it consist of land on both sides of the railroad spurs?
Yes, it basically the north boundary is Wells Road and Railroad Road, and right there at the curve where Railroad starts to go to the northeast, you can see a fence line that starts heading south from there, and eventually kind of borders Earl Cummings, and then that would go all the way down to East Martin Street, and then East Martin over to G Street, and then back up to Wells. So that whole square right there is the 13.39 acres.
And that's what you're leasing right now?
Yes.
Okay. When I look at that area and I divide the 340,000 apparently market value by that acreage, that's $25,392 an acre. How is that? I don't know who did the appraisal or where it came from, but how is that broken down in land value, improvements value, and railroad spur value?
So I can address that. The company that did it is out of Texas. Bill, do you remember what their WT? So it's actually 3 parcels that are on that property.
Okay, that's Bumgardner's crew out of Abilene is WT.
Yeah, they're out of
West
Texas. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And we have that was completed in October. So that was the offer is at the appraised value that they came up with, and their methodologies of coming up with it. They did not count the improvements because the improvements are already owned by Ergon. So it's just vacant land.
So Ergon owns the rail spur also?
No, they don't own the spur.
So where is that in the market value?
It's was taken into account by the appraiser, and it's probably within that report that I can send you that report.
Yeah, I would think that the legal committee needs access to that also, so they know the the breakout that the appraiser used to determine both land value and rail spur value.
So whether or not they could pull comps for the rail spur value for this area, I'm not sure what methodology they would have used. You could probably speak to that more, how they would do that as an appraiser.
And I could, but I'm not going to opine unless I see the report.
Okay, we can get that to you, and we might be able to do it now.
Any other questions, commissioners? No. Commissioner Armstrong.
I'm not sure if, when I saw this, I hadn't recognized anything on this before. Have we ever talked about it as?
No, this is one of the more interesting little tidbits. The city council has been briefed on this in closed session because it's a property acquisition, property disposal type matter. This has been presented in 2, I believe, closed sessions to the council. And that's what makes it a little bit awkward because we were in negotiations with Aragon, and you have to do that confidentially.
Well, what's expected of us today?
Well, today, the intention is to inform this commission. I mean, this is one of those industries that, although it's at the air center, really doesn't have any aviation aspect to it. So it's there, but as opposed to like air sale, it's not really a core business. And it's this entity that's been there for how long? 2009. Western Emulsion.
Yeah, I believe Western Emulsions first started building that terminal back in 2009 or 10, if I'm
Okay.
correct, if I remember correctly.
So the intent here is to make a public presentation and to discuss this. If there's issues that this body would like to suggest or recommend to legal committee, we have the legal committee chairperson here, and we also have Counselor Perry, who is also on legal, I believe. Yeah, so we have 2 of the 4 legal committee members here hearing this presentation as well, and can hear your concerns and or questions.
How unusual or how common is it for the city to sell property like this?
It's not completely unusual. We had sold land by ILEA to Tulip 4 years ago for hotel development. So these areas are outside of our aeronautical area. So the FAA has been informed. We've shared this with them, and right now they have no objections to this sale.
Okay, so I want to make sure that I understand and just for my own comfort, this is really being looked at because it is outside of the aviation area, correct?
Correct, and it's an existing leasehold.
And I'm guessing that the city doesn't have any issues with this because of the fact that it is. I just have a little bit of concern with maybe setting a precedence that, and I do get it that this is outside of that, but I just have some reservations, and I'm not sure that I just have the reservation that this is an area that the city can easily lose control over. I'm familiar with, prior to Aragon Western Emulsions, I know their products, and I know the businesses that they're in, or the business that they're in, and I appreciate the fact that they're here, but I think this needs to be looked at very carefully to make sure that we're not setting some kind of a future precedent on selling any of the property, and that's just my standpoint on it. So,
Okay.
Okay. Other, Mr. Stark?
Yeah, Commissioner Armstrong, I just wanted to clarify something, that this particular land is outside of the airport aeronautical area, but it is inside our airport layout plan. So to just, like I said, just to be clear and make sure we understand the full picture, the FAA does have a say-so on release on this property, and we're going through that process, and Mark's correct in that they have no objection at this point, and they're positive on they won't give us an answer on the outcome until they give us an answer on the outcome, but they're positive at this point, I guess by lack of negative is probably the best way to put that. So yeah, there is that extra layer of oversight from the FAA as well as internal city.
so Mayor, are you saying that this information could not have been provided to us earlier?
That is a question I think we would have had to go into a closed session to do it, and that was probably something we could have done, but we just didn't get around to doing it. Because, and even then, I'm not sure how much can be shared outside of the governing body on a property acquisition.
Okay.
That's the tricky area.
And Scott, I appreciate you talking about this still has to have some FAA approval, because then I would wonder, well, why are you all even involved in it? So you've answered that question, and so earlier I had asked what is needed by us. Are we going to take a vote on this, or are we taking a vote to give recommendation to the city, or are we just hearing the process?
We can take an action. We can either say we agree, or we have concerns, or we can take no action. It's considered a business item, regular item, so this body could either choose to make a motion to recommend going forward, it can choose to make a motion to not go forward, or it can just stay moot on this if it chooses. And I think the value of this is that we have two members of the legal committee hearing your questions live, so that they can hear what you have to say. Go ahead, Commissioner Kunkel.
Larry, I've got a couple more questions. It looks like the future value of the lease payments is $115,000. You and I both know that that can be addressed through the parameters used to define what kind of rate of return on those lease payments you get. So that should be, I'm assuming that analysis was also done in the appraisal, Mr. Blatt?
I believe so, and I think Jeff's printing those out for us now.
Okay. That being said, Larry, do you have other properties that you lease that are similar in size, that have rail spur access and street access that would be relatively similar to this? And if you do, what kind of leases are you paying on those properties in other areas? Because obviously that impacts the current value of the lease payments.
I honestly do not have that information available right now. Of all the locations we have, I'm pretty much just involved with our western United States, and I'm not sure what goes on in other parts of the country as thoroughly as I do out here. But we don't have any direct leases like this with any other cities that I'm aware of. And I think, as we all know, that the lease values would vary dramatically depending on, your location of the country, whether you were in a large metropolitan area where the demand for rail spurs was high, and just land values in general change dramatically from area to area. So I honestly do not have that information. That is something that, if we do have anything similar to this, Drew Brooks would be the person that would be able to get that information for us. But like I said, I think that I think trying to compare, what we have in Roswell versus some other part of the country might not be a fair comparison either. But again, it all just, it's relative to what market area that you're in, I think would have a lot to do with it.
Larry, you're correct in your analysis of that. What I was trying to determine was a thumbnail sketch of whether or not we're the city of Roswell leasing this specific property for what it needs to be leased at. And I understand that there's other higher demand areas, there's other higher demand rail spurs, but a lot of those things can be addressed if there's enough data, and I don't know what data WT appraisers use to do this.
Well, the current lease that we have is good through 2028, and it only stipulates 3% or CPI, whichever is greater. And currently their lease is $1,030 a month for the land.
And that includes access to the rail spurs.
Yes. That was the lease that they had assigned from Western Emulsions.
That's pretty cheap.
That's pretty cheap, and that's not the lease that we did in recent history. That's a lease from
I don't
several
care-
years ago.
I don't care who did it, but that obviously impacts the $115,000. And so if that lease, and I don't know what it'd take to get there, but if you use $115,340, if the lease was at $3,000 a month instead of $1,000 a month, the value of the lease payments, depending on the parameters the appraiser used, could be higher than the appraised value.
Perhaps.
And I don't know whether 3,000 is right or not. I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that we do not have enough information to understand this deal.
It's a 109-page document, so we'll print one copy now that you can review, and we can send electronic copies to you.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Kunkel, you still have the floor.
Unless somebody else has anything.
Okay, I have Commissioner Burris over here.
All right, just correct me if I'm wrong. We brought this forward for information, all right, now public. Our recommendation, if this leaves this committee here, would be going to legal, is that correct?
Yes.
So legal would actually be where we look at the words of the bill of sale, basically your 100 and some page documents and what's fair, correct?
Correct.
So really what you need here is whether or not we think we should proceed to legal and then full council.
You can make a recommendation either way.
I'd like to make a recommendation, we move this forward to legal with the expectation that all the documents are present at that committee for review.
All right, I'll treat it as a motion by Commissioner Burris to move this on to legal, with or without a recommendation, or just to move it on to legal? Okay, move it on to legal without a recommendation. Do I have a second? I don't hear a second. So it will die, the motion will die without a second. All right, Commissioner Burris, you still have the floor. Okay, anyone else, questions or comments on this? Okay. Thank you on
So-
this matter, but do you also had some additional things you wanted to share? Larry, thank you for your
Well,
participation.
there's, the detailed offer letter is the next presentation,
Oh, okay,
and that's also supplied in hard copy.
okay. So did you
All right,
want
Mark, am I done, Mark?
Yeah, you're still
This
on.
is Larry. Okay, well, I'm gonna hang up, and again, appreciate everybody's time.
No, go ahead and stay on, Larry, because we're moving on to the actual offer letter so they can review that and see if there's questions within
Oh,
that.
okay. All right.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so if you look at the offer letter, it does spell out most all the things that was mentioned within the presentation. So first item within this agreement, Aragon will have 30 days after the day of the agreement is signed to perform due diligence on the property and obtain title insurance commitment acceptable to Aragon. Closing would be contingent upon city obtaining any required consents of the FAA to the proposed transfer. Closing would take place upon expiration of the 45-day waiting period following final approval and transaction by City Council, assuming a first reading at the Council's May 9, 2020 meeting. We would expect closing to occur around September 1st, 2020. Aragon has the financial resources to close and will not require any financing contingency. Upon closing, Aragon will install reasonably privacy landscaping along the north and west boundaries of the property to provide a buffer between Aragon's plant and the adjacent residential area. The city will maintain the rail line and property, and Aragon will reimburse the city for actual cost of such maintenance up to and not to exceed the sum of $20,000 per calendar year. If and when additional users begin to utilize the rail line, maintenance costs will be allocated among the users on an equitable basis. The city will reserve an easement for the location, maintenance, and operation of the rail line on the property. In order to provide Aragon with uninterrupted use of the existing rail crossing on Railroad Avenue, Aragon would, at Aragon's cost, make the infrastructure improvements described and depicted on Exhibit A, including demolition of portions of Railroad Avenue and Southeast Wells Street and construction of a new connector road linking the remaining segment of Railroad Avenue to East Earl Cummings Loop. Aragon's timeline for completion of this project is estimated to be 3 weeks from start to finish. Therefore, we anticipate this project to be completed within 1 month of approval of sale of land. Any questions on the offer?
Commissioners? No. Any questions? No questions or comments? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Anything else on item number 6? Mr. Holloman, did you want to address item 6 at all? The transaction, because you've been involved with that.
I mean, I will just say that part of the timeline depends on when the documents can be prepared. So once the official action that City Council would take is to approve an ordinance authorizing the sale, and that would require the preparation of the real estate agreement. So you would have the real estate agreement and then the approval of the ordinance, and then if the ordinance is approved, it doesn't go into effect for 45 days. There's a public referendum period. So that would be the next legal steps to take on the sale of this.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Holloman? Okay. All right. Thank you. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about besides the Aragon matter?
Not until we get to the crunch pad.
Okay, fair enough. Just make sure we're not skipping over anything. All right. Next up is item number 7.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. I feel a little strained sitting down, so I think I'm going to stand up, actually. We have what's being passed around is the modifications. If you'll remember on the ordinance, we had discussed that there are 2 separate ordinances that would be drafted. One is the amendments to Chapter 5, which consolidates a lot of the existing ordinance and refers out to separate sections. The second piece of that is the inclusions in the zoning code, which takes some of the enforcement mechanisms from the aviation, which have to do with design standards and hazards that would exist at the airport property, and then moves that into the zoning code for enforcement. And I was able to connect with Bill Morris, the Community Development Director, and so he helped me and actually came up with some additional things to add in there. What you'll see on the ordinance language, it's the one that has the red line version. This has been presented before. If you'll notice, the red lines are the changes that are to be made to the ordinance itself. That's what we had discussed last time. Up at the top, it says the updates, 415. The items that are highlighted are what I had in my notes to be changed. A lot of that had to do with modifying the name of the Air Center and then just cleaning up the language so that it says director instead of manager on there. And you can see where those changes have been made highlighted. On the second ordinance, this is the one that would make the changes to the zoning code specifically. The first thing it does, Section 1, it incorporates the necessary definitions into the definition section of the zoning code. Section 2 creates a new section under the Buildings and Performance Standards article in the zoning code. Number 1 establishes what airport hazards are, prohibits airport hazards, and then allows for the preparation of an airport approach plan, basically saying that these areas are protected and we reserve the right to limit what kind of development can happen around these areas. And then the second part would be that we have the authorization to remove any kind of airport obstructions that would exist. The one point that I will note that we added on there is the existing language only talked about airport obstructions in terms of height. So trees or structures can't be too tall if they're within the approach plan. And this was a contribution from Bill that I thought was good, is it also limited lights and lasers, that kinds of thing, which are already prohibited under the FAA. But it reincorporates that and reasserts that we've got that power as the city using those kind of design standards. The other kind of component to that is that the zoning ordinance kind of goes in conjunction with some of the FAA regulations where we have the power to establish these things. So there's a little bit of overlap. We can enforce it under the zoning code using some of those design standards, which I think would help us address it on the front end. But then if there was any other issue, especially anything that occurred in the county area that may not necessarily be subject to the zoning code, we still have the FAA enforcement mechanism that we can pursue on that side. I think that addresses the two items in terms of making the change to the airport ordinance itself. We would then need, the next steps would be to have the policy documents that are referred to in the ordinance. That's the minimum standards, the rules and the regulations. I think those are the two. And then, so all of that, once we have those documents, in addition to these ordinances, that all I would consider to be one unit that we could present as an action item for this represents the complete revision of the Aviation Chapter 5 of our ordinance. With that, I would stand for any questions.
All right, before I go to questions, let me kind of lay out a little bit here. If acceptable, this would go to legal committee for review. If the legal committee liked these proposed ordinance changes, they could theoretically go on the May 14th council meeting to authorize an advertisement for a future public hearing and vote. That would be the June city council meeting at the earliest.
Right.
At the June meeting, this is all theoretical, these two proposed ordinance changes could be acted upon separately, and the resolution dealing with fees that had previously gone to legal from this group could be presented to the council. And ideally, at the same time, the June meeting, those policy documents could be presented for review, but no action by the council. Did I get that pretty much summarized correctly?
The one kind of hiccup in that, and Commissioner Armstrong is probably aware, changes to the zoning code need to go to planning and zoning as well.
Okay.
So I think we missed our kind of coordination on this month. So we would need the zoning portion to go to planning and zoning for review, and then on to legal, and then on to city council.
So we're looking at July then for the...
So likely it would be better to go to July, yes.
Okay, so we'd be looking at a July action by the council. And the question I have for Mr. Stark is, would you be able to have those policy documents done? And by that I mean the policy documents would come to this commission for review, but they would not be acted upon by the legal committee or the council.
I think the minimum standards portion of it should be pretty straightforward. That's got a lot of heavy governance and regulation by the FAA. So it will be very much like the minimum standards that we have currently in the current ordinance. The internal regulations side of it takes a little longer. I see some of what we have being kept, and probably a good discussion in this group about what we want to keep and add. So, yeah, I think, so we're talking about May for a discussion in this group, or June?
May and June.
May and June. I think we could do that. I could at least have a draft here in May, and we could begin to discuss it, and then maybe finish it up in June, sure.
Commissioners, what I'm going is that when this finally does go to the whole council, these two ordinances and that resolution, I want to have a complete package. The two internal documents along with the draft ordinances and the resolution. So if that's kind of the roadmap I've got. And like I said, the internal documents are not going to be approved by the council, but I'd like to see them approved by this commission. So with that, questions, comments on any of this?
So
Commissioner Armstrong.
It looks like the red line version takes care of all of the corrections that we had made from last month's meeting when we reviewed this. As I looked at it, we had to add director or change the name from manager to director, and then we deleted the Roswell Air Center, or the Roswell portion of the Air Center. I don't see anything else that's been changed, so my question is that correct, that everything is as we?
That is correct. The only things that would have been different from when you saw it last month is what's been highlighted.
Okay. All right, I don't have any other comments or questions on it. Looks good to me.
Okay. Other, Commissioner Kunkel?
I think that time frame is realistic.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. If it's okay for this group, what I'd like to do is entertain a motion to forward these two draft ordinances, one to the legal committee, the other one to planning and zoning for their consideration.
So moved.
I have a motion by Councilor Kunkel to move the ordinances, amending Chapter 5 to the City Legal Committee, and the ordinance amending City Zoning Code to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Do I have a second? I have a second by Commissioner Burris. Any discussion or debate on this on this motion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a voice vote, a yes or aye, forwards these two ordinances on for further action by the Legal Committee and the Planning and Zoning Commission. A no or nay rejects that. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. All right, so where we're at then, starting next month, yeah, I think the timing is good here. Next month, we will start talking about the policy documents and get a briefing from Mr. Stark on those. And that gives us May and June to work on those, so that would be before it goes to the council, just for information purposes, in July. So there's still a lot of heavy lifting left. And I will ask the chair of the Legal Committee, Councilor Stubbs, do you have any questions or concerns about that approach that I've laid out? And you have to come up to the microphone to talk, otherwise Ms. Call will chastise me.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I do not, but if I remember correctly, are both on the illegal this afternoon or just the one? They're both on there, so legal will be looking at them, probably just for discussion.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Go ahead and discuss them, but yeah, you've got to have planning and zoning act on the planning and zoning one. You can kind of give them as this is a heads up, Legal Committee, it's coming next month. And you don't need to actually act on this one because we got enough time, probably, but that gives more time for it. All right, that works. Okay. By the way, Commissioners, a little tidbit for you. This is the final curtain call for Mr. Holloman. He is deserting the city of Roswell, and I am bitter and angry about it, but I'm restraining myself. Would you care to any departing words of wisdom for this commission?
I just think it should be a sign of how much affection I have for you that I'm choosing to spend my last day in this meeting with you. So I just am very grateful for the opportunity to have worked here, and just pretty humbled by the experiences and all the good people that have been here. So it is something that I will miss. Thank you.
Well, do we want to then, Mr. Parker Patterson, come forward and can you like hand him a copy of the red line version as kind of a ceremony here? All right.
Handing it off.
There we go. Comments? Counselor, you're an attorney. You're never a shortage for words, so.
No, I don't have a lot to say. Just some of you know me. I think most of you know me. And I look forward to working with everybody going forward.
Okay. Very cool. Thank you, Aaron. All right. Discussion number, item number 8, Mr. Bleth.
So I believe last month this was discussed as far as crunch pad operations. This body took action a few months ago to close the tear-down pad that it's existing, that AirSail currently uses. So we made a date on that of January 1st, 2021, for that no longer to be in operation. We've all discussed the need to have other options for crunching airplanes, and we do want to consolidate those operations where they currently exist with the CAVU pads that are in use. If you look on the diagram, if you can look at the bottom left, you can see part of a pad there. That was the pad that was built by ATS that CAVU currently operates, and that's under a land lease, and that's a 220 by 220 foot pad. And then there's also a pad to the right that CAVU also operates that's currently in operation. So what we're proposing to move forward is set aside about 27 acres that would accommodate 3 pad locations. We don't anticipate 3 pads coming up operational anytime soon, but we do anticipate us building the first pad, and with that we would invest the capital in building a 250 by 250 foot pad. And this was based on conversations with existing companies that do crunch operations. Their preference would be 300 by 300 because that gives them plenty of room to move around. The trucks that they bring in to load the scrap metal onto is done on the pad. They don't do it over the top of the dirt or gravel or anything else because that makes it very difficult to clean up after the fact if things fall out of the truck or fall beyond it. So this gives them enough room to have a couple planes on the pad as well as be able to bring in a truck, have the excavator on it, have everything they need within the pad. We've gotten some preliminary estimates from Louis Nahar, the city engineer, on what the price approximately would be. Obviously, our pricing is going to be probably a little bit high than what a private individual and a private company might be able to accomplish. But right now, that's about $500,000, and that's the number that we've talked about at previous meetings of what that capital improvement would be. We estimate at least a 20-year lifespan for that crunch pad if it's maintained properly and not abused in the process of crunching planes. So our idea at this moment, we've kind of moved away from the idea of doing a hotel type operation where the city kind of manages a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time, a month at a time, and have somebody out there crunching plane and maybe a different person crunching planes at a different time. So we believe probably the best way to move forward is having a operator of that crunch pad that will pay us a land lease for the 9 acres that is on that parcel and pay us for the improvements that we've made on that as part of their lease. And then they would run their operation independently. And they would have the ability of crunching anyone's plane, whether it's AirSail that wants to crunch a plane, or it could be AirSail that wants to be the operator of this pad for their own use. That would be an option as well. Or custom construction, which currently works with AirSail crunching planes. So we have several different entities that are interested in running this type of operation. So they would own the excavators, have the crew, and they would negotiate however they need to with the different entities to crunch planes. And it's important for the Air Center to have more than one entity crunching planes because what would happen once we close down the existing crunch pad is we only have one company crunching planes, and that makes it very difficult for our customers to operate their business if they only have one place to send their plane to. Because once a plane gets here and parts are starting to get picked off of it, that plane is going to be tore down here in the end. It's not going to go someplace else to get tore down. So that's our current concept. We'll be working with Armstrong. We've already have been in discussions with Armstrong. They're the ones who created this engineering layout that you're looking at. And for the RFI process, or if we choose to do an RFP process for a crunch pad operator.
All right.
Do you have anything to add to that, Scott?
No, I think that covers it for now. Questions?
Questions, commissioners, on this? Here we go.
You have a ballpark of what that lease would per month would be?
If we're trying to get back the cost of the improvements over the term of the lease or the term of the lifespan of it, land rent, if you're looking at 7 cents an acre times the 9 acres, and then whatever that improvement cost would be. So we haven't defined all the numbers just yet. We're still waiting for a few more third-party quotes to get that number, but that'll be included within the RFP.
And those pads would have, a way of evaporation tanks, things like that for any of the waste that
Correct. Yeah,
potentially
they would
end up
have
on the-
the oil, fuel, water separator capabilities that you would be able to pump out. So this would be all EPA compliant.
Perfect.
Go ahead and state your name for the record.
Oh, Jordan Krill.
Okay. Other questions, commissioners? Anybody? Commissioner Kunkel?
So the two pads that are out there now, that are fully operational, they're both smaller than what the city's proposing to build,
Correct.
okay? But the 250 by 250 is smaller than, which crunch companies said it'd be better to have 300 by 300?
Sean Vaughn from Cavu is who I talked to.
But Cavu already operates these other two, right?
Correct.
So do they have full rights as to lease on those other two?
Correct. They're both in leasehold with Cavu.
So unless AirSail cuts a deal with Cavu, they don't have opportunities unless a new one's built.
Correct. After January 1st.
So I understand then, so there's no, so Cavu has got first dibs on that pad? I mean,
Well, it would be an open RFP.
between now and January 1st?
Correct. So they would have an opportunity, just like anyone else would, to bid on that. Whether or not they want to own and operate 3 crunch pads, that would be a business decision on their part.
That would seem to me to be counterintuitive on the city's part. I mean, if we've got 2 business entities that are crunching airplanes, I would think we'd want to try to accommodate that.
We would assume that AirSail or Custom Construction would be interested in responding to that RFP.
Now, we had discussed the idea of the rental arrangement with the city, with the Air Center staff managing it. And I was under the impression that's the direction this group was interested in pursuing.
But that's what we talked about last time, but that's not what we're hearing now. It's an option.
It's always an option. We'd have to look at liability and risk management and owning equipment and insuring the equipment, those type of things for operations that equipment wasn't designed for, but is the proper equipment to do it with, excavators as an example.
Well, I don't think we're interested in having the equipment. We just rent the pad, the dirt. All right, Mr. Stark.
I was over here having a side conversation with Mr. Holloman. Excuse me. And I know we mentioned it once before, but RFPs, of course, are not fully focused on only the lowest bidder type of arrangement when you award those. So our intention, of course, is to not have a monopoly. We don't want having one company have 3 or 4 or 5 tear-down pads. We want opportunities for everyone. So I think the language in the RFP is going to be the key to that. It would probably need to be carefully crafted so that we don't set up a monopoly, so that we either make sure that, let's say if, and however we do it, I'm just throwing out examples because I'm shooting from the hip on this, but when we do the RFP, we set it up so that the company has to deal with the other companies, or we have the ability to deny that company a winner of the RFP based on a monopoly or something like that. We would have to go through the law and all of that to get that language right. But the point, of course, is that we don't create a monopoly and therefore cut out AirSail or anyone else for that matter. They only have one vendor to deal with on the airport. We don't want that.
Okay. Commissioner Kunkel, I'm sorry, I think you got cut off there, and I apologize.
That's okay. So if you send out an RFP, but the responders to that RFP don't have knowledge of what the lease rate would be.
Well, that would be included within the RFP.
Okay. So if somebody wanted to, I understand what Scott just said, but that's really taxing the attorneys to come up with that kind of verbiage. Maybe we can get Aaron to do that this afternoon before he leaves. But I would think that the opportunity would then exist for a bidding war between CAVU and AirSail, which is not a good situation.
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
So let's have Randy talk from AirSail's standpoint about what he thinks we need to do here.
Well, and we could also do an RFI, just like what we did on the wide body hangar, that just kind of puts it out there and it lets people develop it themselves. It may not be our money in the first place that does any of it. So we have those options as well to put it out as an RFI, like we did with T hangars and wide body.
All right. Randy, do you want to pitch in anything here?
A little.
Okay.
So the distribution teardown side of AirSail is not under my control, but I can kind of speak to some of what I'm sure my peers are going to speak to this. So in the bigger picture, AirSail is into the parts sales business. The MRO side where I'm on control of, and in our MRO in Goodyear, that is not their biggest, stick in the fire here. It is part sales. Obviously, if we don't have a place to tear down aircraft, the parts that we have in the hangars or in the buildings that we have around here now in the hangar, the aircraft that there can be used on they're old, and some of these parts are probably going to go to the way of the dodo bird. So us being able to tear down newer generation aircraft and to store those parts somewhere, obviously we'll be using the buildings that we're in now. But if we don't have the ability to tear down aircraft on site, then in the bigger picture of things is, why do we need the storage spots for it too? I don't want to get into a bidding war with CAVU over a teardown pad. I just don't. And I don't believe that AirSail would be interested in that. Obviously this needs to go, and I'll, raise at least the flag a little bit to AirSail corporate, to the teardown pad situation. I understand it needs to be moved, no problem with that, and AirSail has no problem with that. But I think that whether it's preferred customer or whatever it is here, I don't want to see a entity on the airport with a monopoly of a teardown pad. And I can guarantee you there will be no deal with CAVU on it. AirSail will not be interested in a deal with CAVU. They're a direct competitor, and that's just not going to go.
And you have the opportunity, today to do a land lease with us and build whatever size pad you'd like to and run that operation.
Let me
So-
interject here. And Mr. Patterson, since the transition has already happened, I'm going to drag you into this. Could we directly, since Air Sale currently has access to a tear-down location, can we directly negotiate with Air Sale without putting it out to competitive bid to say, we don't want you where you're at right now, we want you in a safer location, and we're just going to build this and negotiate directly with them to put them in that location, if you get what I'm saying. In other words, we're just pushing them off to a different part of the same airport because we don't want them, for safety reasons, doing that activity there anymore. Microphone.
In principle, I think you could do that.
Microphone.
You can come up here.
Yeah.
In principle, yes, but it would depend on specifics.
Okay. Commissioner Burris. Let me go with Burris first, then I'll come back to you. Okay, Burris?
Okay, I think the intent of all these discussions from the beginning was to eliminate the tear-down pad we have now. It's just in a bad place, and it is not economically we want to build new hangars, not have tear-down pads right next to the ramp, correct?
Right.
So we started this conversation about closing down a ramp or a tear-down pad that may not be up to snuff, and the city of Roswell replacing that tear-down pad here. So I would think if we close this one, we would transfer that land lease to the new pad. And I thought that was the intent of this whole discussion, is to keep it under control of the city, right, not affect any of our customers. And it's our decision to move it. It wasn't theirs. Am I correct with that? Isn't that the discussions we've had over the last few months?
Yes.
Is that a viable option still, or does someone change their mind?
No. I mean, yes, it's a viable option. No, nobody's changed their mind, and of course, that's with the caveat that council approves it.
Thank you very much. You answered my question.
All right, Commissioner Kunkel, sorry about that.
Since the city currently allows Air Sale to tear stuff down in a location that the city doesn't like Air Sale there, that's a fact. So we need to ensure, I mean, we've talked about ensuring that it's not monopolized. That's important. But Air Sale needs assurances that they can conduct their business here.
Mm-hmm.
And without assurances, meaning they have a pad to go do that, and I don't know whether that means that's where we got to talk about it, whether that means 75% of the time or 99% of the time or 100% of the time that they have access to that pad, then that directs how this RFP goes out. That's how it does it.
And if somebody comes up ahead of us putting out an RFP, then it may negate even the need to do an RFP. If Air Sale says we want to do this, then we just move.
It just sounds to me like somebody needs to get in the same room with Air Sale and say, what can we do to help out business?
So I guess what I'm hearing is a desire for Air Center staff and Mr. Patterson to have a serious discussion and come back to us next month with a specific plan on how we're going to proceed. And the concept being to preserve the competitive nature of tear-down operations. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
Equal opportunity.
Oh, yeah. And just to flesh things out, we've had other people asking about tear-down opportunities as well. So those aren't off the table either. They're not fully on the table, but they're not off the table either. It doesn't mean that that has anything to do with Air Sale. That would be air sales choice, who they do business with.
Okay, now that's an interesting point, because now you kind of threw me a little bit with the other 2 additional pads, and yeah, I think I see what you're saying here, is that we could say Site 3 gets the green light to go ahead and be built in an agreement with air sale.
So,
But 1 and 2 could come along with another
yeah,
party.
anytime. And that's the reason for planning that way, because quite honestly, we don't want all of our airport being tear-down pads. I don't want 15 tear-down pads. And we have to figure out what that right number is. And we've kind of always thought it was somewhere around 5. So, if you include the 2 that are down there now and add these 3, we're at our 5. And they're all in the same area, which is also, as you guys know, strategic.
Okay. Other comments, commissioners? Okay, Commissioner Burrs.
I get back to what I said a minute ago. We had these meetings in the past. We want to protect our tenants, correct, and we want to be fair. We decided to tear down, eliminate the old pad, build a new one. I would think at which point, when you do the land lease, it's transferred, all you're doing is transferring location. Is that correct? One tear down pad, changing the location to here? Is that correct? Could that be addendum to the lease? And I think this would be something that legal needs to ponder, not here. They're going to decide if you need an RFP. So we need to look at legally, what does this lease say? And can we, by addendum, when this is built, transfer them over? We want to treat everybody fairly, but at the end of the day, as a landlord, we eliminated part of their business, correct? Okay, we need to solve our own problem. That solution should be an addendum to their land lease for tearing down airplanes that's transferred to whatever this coordinates are on the airport, and we move on. If another customer goes, whoo, I want to tear down more airplanes, first of all, do you want them? Is there actually a market? They're selling parts, but, do I just want to tear down airplanes? Fantastic. Because I have to buy the airplanes to tear them down. It's all economics. Is that going to justify making new pads? So I love this. However, I still think that the city needs to build their own tear-down pads, which we've talked about, correct? And move from there. So I don't see that, we're going to build 3 pads in a year. All right, so what we have to do is take care of our customer, because we decided to close down their tear-down pad. And you really don't go down that road, do you? Not being able to abide by your lease? I'm just saying. So I still just don't want to lose focus on what we're doing here. We've talked about it many times. And I do think that would protect our customer with just an addendum to the lease. So we don't have to go to RFPs and RFIs and everything else. Just my comments.
All right. Other comments, commissioners? All right. This is my concern is timeline. If we keep delaying this, it's going to take, I don't know how much time it's going to take to build this tear down pad. And so what I would like to see, and please commissioners jump in here, I would like to see a definitive timeline next month where we talk about we're going to build it. We're going to go out with an RFP for a company to build it for us. We're going to enter into some preliminary discussions. What can we legally do as far as predetermined customer for the tear-down pad? We need to have the full gamut worked out here, because I'm worried about, I want us to have a pad up and operational by January 1. Prior to, thank you, yeah, prior to January 1, and no questions or confusion. Airsail needs to know exactly what they're going on. The city needs to know, and this commission is the location to get these issues debated.
And construction time's about a month.
Okay, that's good.
In good weather.
Good weather.
In good weather.
All right. Anything else on this one, commissioners? So we're going to come back next month. We're going to have a definitive plan. And if there's going to be an RFP, I want a draft of the RFP for this body to read.
I would suggest that everybody get in the same room with the attorney and just figure out what we need to do, because we can't exclude air sale from teardown pads.
You're right. That's it. Okay. Okay? Okay, item number 9. Mr. Stark. Sorry.
This item is one we've been working on for a while at one level or another. And I want to say thank you to the mayor for all of his effort in the political side of getting this working through, because it has been 2-3 years. Yeah.
3 years.
So if you look at your handouts, you've got a quick rundown of what has happened, and this information has now come from the federal government. They've begun the process of accessing this land. So I don't know if everybody is familiar, but 57 G Street is directly across from the terminal. It's the ball fields that belong to the Job Corps. And I'm not sure if they've actually, Mr. Mayor, are you sure, do you know if they've started the first 30 days?
Yes.
Okay.
The 30-day actually ended April 16th, in which the property has been declared surplus, and it went out to other federal agencies for 30 days. That 30-day period ended April 16th. So now it's in a phase where it can be offered to us.
Yeah, we're in the second 30-day period then, where we have a couple of options. We need to express interest in the property if we want it, and they can transfer it to us free of cost, but there are limitations on what we can do with it if that's the case. And that's right here in the body of the first page, where it talks about using the property for public benefit. So it could be, I was looking for that list. Okay, educational, law enforcement, parks and rec, correctional institutes, homeless, et cetera. So basically it has to be a public use. So I would say if we wanted to do a overflow parking lot for the airport, that would qualify as public use. If we wanted to sell the property and develop it for another use, either as a warehouse or a hotel or something of that nature, that falls into the second half of step number 2, where we would buy it at fair market value and there'd be no restrictions. So the question really before you guys here is, what do you think? Uses for that property, are we really interested in it? I think we always kind of have been, in terms of, oh gosh, if that ever came up, we'd love it. But we've not really talked about it in this group. So that's really the introduction, and to open that discussion.
I'll give you my 2 cents worth, and we'll just open it up. I would like to see us get this property. Obviously, I wrote a letter to Job Corps 3 years ago saying it's just sitting there. Could we have it? And there's a couple concerns. My reading of the way the federal regs work is for us to get it for anything like free, we have to agree that it will be used for something of beneficial use to the public, subject to GSA oversight and possible clawback. I think it's every 5 years. Mr. Morris is here. He can correct anything stupid that I say. Anything. Into the microphone. Or the other option is to be able to purchase it, which gives us a free hand. Now, Mr. Stark raised an interesting point that if it's purchased with the Air Center's Enterprise Fund, does that put FAA's fingers in the pie? So then the question is, could we purchase it with non-Air Center funds, other city funds, to keep the FAA out of it and GSA out of it to give us the maximum flexibility? So we're at a philosophical discussion. I think the first question is, do we want this? And I asked for it, but we all know I don't have a vote. Well, I do here. So that would be the first question, do we want it? And if we do want it, how do we want to acquire it? And I'd like to just open it up. So, you folks? Mr. Morris, do you want to throw anything else in here while we're doing this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, at this point, we're just kind of looking to elicit some comments.
Into the microphone, otherwise the wrath of call will descend.
I understand. Yes, we're just here to listen to the comments and get some recommendations and go from there.
Okay.
I'm not a proponent of this property being used as something from the nature of a parking lot. I think we have other more accessible properties or land that's a little bit better. First of all, I do think that it's a really good opportunity for the city to purchase the property, and my thought has always been that it would be a perfect land lease for a small hotel, and by hotel, everybody's got to come in on that late flight. They've got to go downtown or whatever. If there's the convenience of a place for them to stay right there, it's just better that particularly if there is a restaurant involved in some way, shape, or form. I don't think it is good for a warehouse or anything, and Bud wanted me to say it's a great tear-down place, but I think this is a really good property for a hotel venture of some kind, and I think when you get where this is, this needs to be aesthetically pleasing, and that's kind of what this gives us the opportunity to do. So I'm for it, only if I think it's utilized in a, I'm not interested in seeing it as a parking lot or a warehouse area or something of that nature. I think this is a good opportunity for it to be a hotel site on a land lease.
Go ahead, jump in there. Got to state your name, though, so they can hear you.
Jordan Krill. So if that was to be a hotel, which I think is a perfect idea, my only recommendation would be that it would have some sort of an extended stay. We have a lot of people visiting our facilities. It's close to the hangar, easily accessible. They're usually here for weeks, or a week or two at a time. In addition, contractors coming in need about a week or so to find permanent housing. So I think that that would be a perfect place for a hotel, and extended stay hotel would be perfect there.
Yeah, as you look at where the land is, we may run into some minor restrictions on appropriate land use because of its proximity to the airport and the runway, but a hotel would not be restricted. Permanent housing would be a church, a school, those type of things might be restricted on the south end of it. On the north end, I think we get out of those zones. And then the mayor mentioned the money side of it too, and just for background, if we used Air Center revenue to buy it, then it will fall under the jurisdiction of the FAA to sell it. So we would need to get a release from it. Now, that doesn't mean that that's prohibitive. My preliminary, they called me about it when they saw this announcement, and they said, "What are you doing with that?" And so they know everything that you know now. And so they said, okay. So if you buy it with city funds, thanks, leave us out of it. That's good. But if we buy it with airport funds, that was their answer. And they also did not seem to have much of an objection to that sort of process either. We would have to have that conversation, but they did not, on the surface, seem to object to us buying it and selling it.
Okay. Commissioner. Microphone, and I'll ask for the...
Which of those two options is really more beneficial to us?
I think that's the punchline.
I think simplicity-wise, it's simpler to buy it with general fund money, with city money. You don't involve the FAA at all. You don't have to ask their opinion. You don't have to, they don't have any jurisdiction over it at all. You know, there's a lot of different ways you can cut that cake, honestly. If we buy it with either money, we could even choose to do something really out of the box and outlandish and risky, like build our own hotel, put an RFP out for an operator. You know, and like I said, that's way out here. I don't know that we'll do something like that, but you know, I'm using Denver as an example. They did exactly that with the Westin at Denver Airport. So the airport could own it and then RFP the operation of it, or the city could do the same. Simple way is to buy it and sell it and let a developer do all that. They do it well. So I don't know. I would like to hear from folks that have done more of this on their own, you know, what might be the better way to do it. I don't know that one is better than the other than if we buy it with city money, we do leave the FAA out.
Now, one little tidbit about city money. You know, we have different kinds of city money. We have general fund money, which I will tell you right now is in short supply. But we also have water, wastewater enterprise fund, and we have sanitation landfill. Those other two enterprise funds are in much better shape financially, actually have cash on in reserves. We could possibly use, say, water department money to buy it, hold it, and work something out. Because one of the other things I'm thinking is we don't really know exactly what we want to do yet. And one of the questions I have, and you two guys are better ones to answer this, is 11 acres enough that we could do multiple things with it?
Right.
Could we do more than just a hotel? Could we do a hotel and could we have a warehouse? I don't know. I mean, you guys know this better than I do. I mean, and so I don't think we have, what I want to get from you guys, I think, is there a sense that staff talk to GSA about acquiring this property? Yes or no? That's to me the one basic question. And Commissioner Kunkel?
I would move that staff move to obtain this through whatever funding source makes the most sense to the taxpayer.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Kunkel and a second by Commissioner Burris to direct staff to enter into negotiation with GSA to acquire this property at the greatest advantage to the taxpayers. Does that sound right? Okay. Any questions on that? Any confusion? All right, then I'll ask for a voice vote. A yes or I approves the efforts to negotiate and acquire that property, and a no or nay rejects it. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. All right. Let's don't leave this yet, though, because we got a couple points. One, Mr. Morris, you're going to have to be involved in these negotiations because this falls under your bailiwick, the whole property disposal thing. And the other thing that we've talked about, and this event and the earlier Aragon thing, is platting at the Air Center. So it's not officially an agenda item, but it kind of ties into this. And I didn't give you any advance warning, but you know where I'm coming from. Can you talk about this a little bit, about how bad it is out there?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. This
Closer, louder.
there.
Yes.
This area out there, the airport basically is comprised of several large pieces of property with lots of structures on it, all sorts. And there's going to come a time when we really need to, just to even divest this property, it has to go through a subdivision process. So it would make sense at some point to start carving out areas and actually formally making those properties independent pieces of property versus just big chunks of dirt out there. And there's several very large pieces.
And some of those, like, streets aren't even
No.
platted out as streets.
Yeah.
They're just included into chunks, which was part of the problem with this one, because Mathis, that whole Job Corps thing included Mathis as part of the Job Corps property, even though it was a city street.
That's correct. And in the plat that we did, the draft plat that we're doing for this particular piece, we did have to call out the right-of-way. So we're starting to make those changes as we should. So streets are going to be actually called out and made real right-of-way as it would any other property within the city. So that's something that we can see coming up. Doesn't have to be the whole thing, but there's some areas that we're kind of pointing out that obviously everybody's looking at and would be time to kind of start that subdivision process.
Now, and then let me throw one more thing out, and I'd like you guys to chime in on this and see what you think. One of the things that I find frustrating when I look on that map, the Sidwell map, and where you can see where everything's kind of platted, is, say, air sale leases 85. Well, what does that include outside the building? How much of that plat is theirs to control as far as the dirt, the asphalt? And conversely, if we want to lease area to somebody, what does that really look like? What's that whole area, like the shredding company? What do they got? I mean, that plat, if I remember right, also includes part of the old wells or the existing well street. So, and this is a huge endeavor. So we're not going to do it all at one time, but we could start. Is that, Mr. Morris, will you?
I think the best thing would be to identify those general areas that people are interested in looking at subdivisions, to create those properties, to get ready for the disposal or use or lease or whatever comes up down the line. I would think that the northwest part along Hobson, there are some properties up there that are still very large, but going through and identifying those areas that y'all would be interested in thinking that would be appropriate for that some kind of subdivision in the future, and then we can go ahead and do an RFP to select a surveyor, but it will not be cheap, because we're talking about some pretty large chunks of dirt.
Start with the easier areas first.
We'll practice.
And that would be where?
Yeah. And I would kind of look at, Bill's absolutely right, it's a mess and it needs to be fixed, but I would also look priority-wise at, which ones need it sooner. Do we need to do it all at once? The answer to that is probably no. You said it. But, which are the areas that might get sold, used, need a description and a platting sooner, and that would be probably a good way to go at priorities. When you're looking at area 1 and 2 in the inside the airport, we're not going to lease that way. So the division of those monstrous areas, are less so. But out along Earl Cummings, yeah, there's probably a lot of need, and then some of the other places outside.
Well, as a little tidbit, on this map of the Job Corps property, you see this little triangle here on the, if you're looking at it, it's on the right side. It actually is on the east side. There's a little triangle there where the road curves out and intersects with Earl Cummings.
Mm-hmm.
The city already owns that. So we have that little piece right there. So if we acquire this whole property, do we replat it to include that into the new? You're the expert.
Sure. If it's ours and if we own it, we can do it very simply. There's the way to do that. But I think the idea here is to take care of those problems. Also to apply like modern addresses to these buildings. We're still referencing World War II building nomenclature, which doesn't fit with the 911 system. They all happen to know where everything is out there because of the fire department being out there forever. But it's still, for the future, start to kind of transition out.
Okay.
And the one you pointed out there is a good example of where actually the streets changed. So most likely that G Street came straight down and hit whatever the old street was there before Cummings, and so the lines are still the same as they were when the streets were there, but the streets have moved, so things don't line up quite the right way.
So what I'd like to consider, and I want our people to chime in here, is that starting next month, Mr. Morris comes back with a phased plan for replatting. In other words, you know, you hit upon the idea of the cost, and where would you start? How much do you think we should spend? That kind of thing. You know, that to me would be, I'd like to see us pursue that. I don't know if that's unreasonable or not, so that's why I'd like you guys to chime in, especially Commissioner Armstrong and Kunkel, because you guys do this for a living.
I agree that it's important to get legal descriptions defined. Some of the larger tracts that are vacant now, if we have exact sizes due to a survey, we're better than not having that. Some of the tenants that we have now, their leases don't define a site.
Correct.
Okay? And so I don't, to go out and hire somebody to go survey that tract right now, I'd say let's get the tract. And then I don't know how much GRT is going to go down. I know Mr. Nebb has guesstimated a lot of stuff, but if we have to start, if the possibility exists that we have to start sending city employees home, I think we should keep city employees before we pay a surveyor.
Now, we could use airport enterprise. I'm thinking that airport funds would be a legitimate way of expending that money for the surveying of the air center.
For anything that the airport has control of. So inside the ALP,
Yes.
I would say if we have a plot of land where we've got several houses on it for some reason, and or the houses are not platted out with the streets cut out, you know, and that's outside of the airport in the residential area, we can't do that. That would be diversion. But anything down on the airport side where our property is, where our warehouses are, where our hangars are, fair game. And I'll talk in the next subject about budgets.
Well, and I think Commissioner Kunkel raises the point that we're not going to get general funds money to do the surveying, but I think it would be, especially since we got all the parking money coming in for the extra 270 planes, that money could be utilized towards the purpose of properly identifying, because we're not always going to have that parking money, but here's a chance to use it to do some, it's not infrastructure, but it really is, because you got to define your places, and I just think this would be, I'd like to have us have a discussion on this and have a plan presented.
I would suggest that it would be good to do that. It doesn't cost anything to talk about it and kind of draw lines and go, well, we think this is what we might want it to look like. That's just us. You know, it's when we engage the surveyor that it costs money.
And you may want to consider looking at major tenants out there inside the fence.
Yep.
That you don't have a defined site size.
Yep.
Correct.
And as long as tenants that adjoin another tenant agrees with it, you just define it by that. Everybody agrees, and you survey it out and make it an addendum to their lease.
Yep.
That is probably a good use of those
Yeah.
funds, and that helps the tenants.
I would agree. I mean, what we do now is if we don't describe it, it's the building. That's all they have. But realistically, does anybody ever have only a building? They have to park their car somewhere. So
Yep.
those things would be great improvements.
I mean, like, just things like the streets, like, is it Challenger? Challenger Street is not platted as a street.
No.
In any way, shape, or form. And so, good grief. All right, so commissioners, can we have Mr. Stark and Mr. Morris come back with a plan next month? That, I see heads nodding in the agreement that in connection with the this is all in connection with the property at 57G Street, building on that need to define these properties. So, Mr. Stark, you feel comfortable understanding what we're doing here, and Mr. Morris, same thing? I
draw
see
lines.
heads nodding. All right. Unless there's someone else on 57G Street, we will move on to item number 10.
Item number 10 is a good news story. One of the few good news things out of this whole COVID pandemic. The federal government, as you guys know, did a stimulus package, which was huge, and I won't even go into the other parts of it that aren't mine because I'm not that knowledgeable about them, other than most of us got a check. But airports get a check too. That's the point of this. So they had different pockets of money, and there are handouts, so please look at those. So they did it in 4 different pieces. On your sheet, I mean, I apologize for the name being wrong on the agenda, but it's actually the Coronavirus Aid Relief Economic Security Act, rather than what it says on the agenda. But there is a piece of it for airport grants that these grants are not coming out of normal AIP, so the requirements for them are a little bit different. The ability to use the money on anything else is a little bit different. Down at the very bottom of that sheet, it talks about being able to use the money for any legal use on an airport. So that is anything we spend money on. That's our pay, compensation, and benefits. That's our projects. That's debt service. I mean, you can go on and on. All those things that we do as the normal course of business in an airport are eligible for this grant to be used on. They calculated the grant out of 4 different pieces, and they're on your sheet there. We did not qualify for anything out of the first piece because that's based on 2020 AIP grant funding and supplemental grant funding. We rolled our 20 grant funding over because we received a 2019 supplemental that replaced it. So that means that we won't get the 100% backfill that's in number 1 for that. And we didn't get any 2020 supplemental yet. And I'm assuming that we probably won't. I don't know if they've announced it yet or not. So any money from number 1 is out, but that's a fairly small piece for us. Number 2 is calculated on a formula, and we're getting basically $1 million out of that one. Number 3, we're getting also, I think that one was $238,000. No, $233,000 we're getting out of that. So the grand total is at the bottom. $233,16 is a grant that I got in my email inbox yesterday that haven't done anything yet with because I wanted to talk about it to this group. The purpose of it, of course, is to keep airports sustainable. A lot of airports have had a lot of pain in their budgets this year because of the COVID pandemic, and we've had some as well. Because of our lack of passengers, our PFC charges are going to drop basically to nothing. I mean, right now we're not, we get $450, we're not getting anything right now. We're barely anything. So we count on that being very low for the rest of the year, so we'll be losing out on that. We'll be losing out on probably due to less activity, fuel flow fees, that type of thing. Our parking, of course, and our landing fees are up because of moving airplanes to be stored. The grant offer that I have right now is for operational funds, and I haven't really gone through the thing with a fine-tooth comb yet. But the FAA they have pre-filled that grant out for us, and that's for an operational grant. If we want to spend all of the money on operational money, so our pay, compensation, benefits, debt service, which I have on number 2, I broke down based on this year's budget numbers, we can spend it, and it covers all of our paychecks on the administrative side and on the operational side, and it covers our debt service. And that'll take up the whole grant. Basically, all I've got to do is fill in a few blanks and sign the document. The mayor, of course, has to sign the document, but, because that's what the FAA does. And so that's what I wanted to brief you guys on. I put it on as an action item because at the time that we got the announcement, it was like, well, I don't have details yet, so I don't know how much decision-making this is going to be or whether it's fully informational to you guys. There's not necessarily a decision that needs to be made here. I put it on there in case there was because of the timing to get it on the agenda. But I would advise that the quickest, best use of that money is to take it and put it against our operational cost, because that's, first of all, what FAA is encouraging, and it makes a lot of sense. Then we can take that money and we can repurpose it another way. If we have any, if we have losses, that takes care of all those losses. And then with the extra parking, the extra landing fees, with what's freed up out of operational pay compensation benefits and debt service, that could be repurposed for something else. A teardown pad comes to mind. With that, questions?
Yep. Okay. Commissioners?
So, where does this
Commissioner? Mike?
Where does this go? Thank you. Where does this go from here, or can we approve this? Does it have to go to council? What?
So in the long run, to accept the money, we've already done a resolution to do that. The mayor can just sign it, and we accept the money. We'll have to do a budget amendment, which will have to go through finance, but that's fairly normal course of business. We did it with our $2 million grant that we got on the MAP grant. But, does it have to be changed on the expenditure side? I would say no, because we've already budgeted that. If there's any financial folks here, I'd, chime in. But I think, that's already expenditure in my budget. That doesn't change. It's just where the money comes from to fund that. And then we wind up with extra money being in reserve, and we would have to budget that when we decide what we're going to do with that. Does that make sense?
So what's needed from us?
Well, to be honest with you, I just saw this number for the first time, just like you guys. But the topic I'd like us to, and I don't think we have time today because we need to really think about this, is I would argue the Air Center is different from anything else at the city or in this community, in that we suddenly got an influx of the funds from landing fees and parking fees. This grant money, the potential is out there for other funds as well. And so the question is, how do we wisely spend it? And I'd really like this commission to chew on this and kind of come up with a strategic plan, working with Mr. Bleth and Mr. Stark to, if it's a total of like about between parking and this money, say $2.5 million, roughly, how do we want to divvy this up? And that's outside the scope of today's time, but this is why I would like to talk about it. And like I say, I don't think we have time today, but.
And honestly, that was my first intention too, not knowing very much about it when we got the announcement, was okay, I can spend this on anything. Well, I'm an airport guy. First thing I think of is projects, right? Because we have no end to things. But then after listening to two different presentations by FAA, I'm going, it makes a lot of sense to spend it on operational too. For one, we're never going to get another grant we can spend on operational. It's just, they don't do that. And the mayor is correct. Whether we spend this grant on projects or we spend it on operational, we free up other money to spend on projects, I believe we have a discussion to do here. And that's also why I would recommend we spend this grant money on the operations, because it's simplest. If we decide, okay, we want to do a $500,000 project here and a $750,000 project there, they will have to go through FAA approval processes and NEPA and all those things. If we choose to use our own money without any other additions to it, it's under our rules. We do with it what we want. So we simplify by using this money for operationals, and then we simplify by using anything out of the reserve based on our rules, based on the state rules. The FAA doesn't have any input into it other than what goes on an airport.
That
Jim?
sounds like a great idea to me. Spend it on operations, and it gives this committee, council, the city manager, everybody else a chance to look at
Yep.
where that should be best used, especially as tight as things are. You're getting relief from the federal government because you're an airport, but it's very hard in the city right now to operate. So I think you're spot on with using that for operational, and then get everybody else's input on the rest. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay.
Is-
Commissioner?
Is there a timeline on this?
Good
We have 4
question.
years to spend the money.
Okay.
How many?
4 years.
Oh, okay, cool. Let me, while we're also talking about this, is there something separate for small community air service? Or is that included in this one? I mean, what I'm thinking about is when they try to get air service back up and running, communities like ours might have to do an MRG again. That's not,
That's not part of this.
okay. Commissioners?
If we got 4 years to spend this, I would really encourage that this information gets to the city manager.
It has. We've discussed it.
Okay. And then what options are there? I mean, knowing what we know about gross receipts taxes and what's going to happen starting about July 1,
Mm-hmm.
if the airport staffing can be funded and taken care of, that should allow some flexibility by the city manager to keep other city employees on board.
Yeah, this takes care of our funding for our jobs for a year.
And we'll never get that opportunity again.
Correct.
Well, and just so you know, the city general fund does not go into the air center,
Correct.
so
But
there's no crossover that way. Actually,
But where there could be a little crossover, and again, we haven't even really, we've touched on this just barely. So if we have needs where we want to staff up at the air center, but we have people in the city that we're going to lay off, we might have a need where we could exchange. So you save those jobs by putting it at the air, so we pay for all of our normal stuff that we have right now with this. Now we have funds freed up, but we could use some of those funds freed up to fund some of these people who would otherwise be on the street. We could pull them down to the air center, put them to work out there doing stuff on the airfield itself, or if we have office needs, if that's their expertise, there are different options that we could shuffle around a little bit where we wouldn't have this option the same way another time.
So when you talk to the city manager, tell him his tear-down pad's supposed to run 500,000. So throw that into the mix.
yeah. No, I think it's a valid point. And Commissioner Call, did you want to jump in on any of this? Okay. So what I think I'm hearing is we want to continue this discussion next month with some kind of like budget plans. What are we looking at for all this stuff? And like I'm wondering about the small community air service, because where I'm going with this, if we need to come up with money to do an MRG, say to get the Phoenix flight back, we can't use that SCASD grant, which we got for Denver,
Right.
for that.
Right.
That grant is sitting off to the side. But to get Phoenix back, we may need to do some kind of an MRG to get it up and running. I'm not saying we definitely do, but I'm kind of concerned. This may, we have the mechanism to use lodger's tax to help with MRGs, but lodger's tax went into tank as well. So we're looking at probably having to use something like this for that. And I'd like us to just get further into this discussion and really look at how we can properly use this, and there may be additional funding. I mean, another stimulus package just got passed, I believe,
Yeah, and I don't know anything about that. It was smaller, and I think it was mostly for small businesses, but I really don't know much about it.
Yeah, I don't,
So I would assume for now, this is it for airports, but it's a good one.
okay. So, on that note, anything else on this one, or do we want to start looking at the May meeting? And I think we've come up with a couple things we want to talk about. Continuing the discussion on a definitive plan for the tear-down pad. Bill Morris on the plating. CARES dollars, and the policy documents. I'd at least like to get those started in the those two. There's two of them, correct?
At least two.
Okay.
I'm going to have to look. There would be the minimum standards and then the general, but I'm also looking at where some other security type things fit in, and we may not need to produce documents for those. We may just have to refer to them.
Okay.
Because the security documents are already in place.
So some kind of outline on where we can go with that, with the continued objective that something goes to the entire council July. And we also want to continue with the 57G Street property acquisition, an update on that, where that is.
Is there a way, I know we get the agenda items and a few other things, but it seems like every time we have some handouts, and I think it's a little bit more appropriate if we have these in advance rather than trying to look through them the first time at the meeting. And Aragon is a perfect example. I didn't like the presentation of this at all, only because I felt a little bit blindsided by it. Maybe that's not the case, but that's the way I felt. And I just think that if we're going to vote on some of these things, or if we're going to make a decision, we need to have some of these items prior to the meeting. And I'll tell you, my deal was a no on Aragon only because I couldn't assimilate enough information. So that's my thought.
Okay.
Fair enough.
I think that's legitimate concern. Let's try and get out the handouts. It doesn't have to be a formal agenda release. We can wait and do that towards the end because Open Meetings Act, but as much information as we can get to the commissioners ahead of time, once we know what people are going to talk about, we can get there. Anything else we need to put on the agenda? Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, buddy.
But then, when has it not been?
Right?
Oh my gosh.
We'll take a vacation when that day happens.
All right, let me, are you comfortable, because I see this planning and zoning ordinance thing, a lot of, oh, that's right. That's right, I forgot that your term limit is.
So chairman still needs to be chosen.
I might ask you to go to that, if you don't mind, because you know the organization, and you could talk about this, kind of give them an overall briefing with Scott, if you don't mind. Speaking of chairman, we don't have it on the agenda, so we can't do it now. We need to probably, as a commission, next month, choose a chair and vice chair. So, think about that.
I thought about it after we had the agenda done. But
Yeah,
it happens.
I know. Anything else? We have any public input, participation? Been kind of doing that all along, which I kind of like, by the way. I appreciate you guys being here. And I like you guys being at the table too, because I think we need to have this discussion. This is not like city council. This is a lot more flexible and exploring and getting it right. So I like the discussion, so thank you for being here. So, all right?
Where's
Anything
Larry?
else? Not, I have, the time now is 12:22, and we're adjourned.